So I hope my screen is visible now. Okay. So this is module 4 of level 1 functional nutrition basic course. And the topic is blood sugar and insulin basics. Uh, so today we are going to understand the basic blood sugar and insulin. So how the glucose enters the body, how the insulin responds, and what happens when this system stops working effectively and efficiently. So also known as insulin resistance. So the goal is here to build a foundation before we move to the advanced metabolic topics. So this will going to help you in covering level 2 and level 3 also. So let's just understand what actually sugar is. So blood sugar simply means that glucose in the bloodstream. So glucose, as we all know, is a primary fuel of the body. So even cells uses, so every cell uses it for the energy purposes, especially the brain, which is dependent upon glucose. So unlike muscles, and liver also, the brain cannot store glucose. So it needs a steady supply all the time. Okay, by that means that uh, your this thing, just a second. So your brain needs glucose every second. Okay, so and this is a critical concept because blood sugar must stay within a normal range. Okay? So in case there are fluctuations or if the sugar is going too low or too high, so in case the blood sugar is going low, so the person becomes immediately like dizzy or confused or a sweaty or shaky uh, events can happen, even fainting also. In extreme cases it can become life threatening also. Okay, so but if the sugar is too high all the time, so it becomes damaging for the organs like the inflammation. So high glucose slowly injures the blood vessels, the nerves, the eyes, the kidney and the heart. So the body treats blood sugar like a survival parameter. Okay, similar to oxygen or a body temperature. So this is why the blood sugar balance is not just about the weight loss. It is for the body, it is like a survival priority. Okay. So the brain cannot store glucose, that we've just understood, unlike muscles and liver, because they work as a reserve tank. Uh, it needs a steady supply of glucose uh, from the bloodstream to function properly. So because the brain is so vital organ, so the body protects the blood sugar very aggressively. And if the sugar begins to fall, the body immediately activates its survival mode, like the survival hormone, especially the cortisol. And this can create symptoms such as a sudden hunger or irritability or a intense craving. Even hunger is equals to anger. This is a common thing which we come across. Mostly, how do people define like anger with hunger? So from the body's viewpoint, a stable blood sugar equals safety. So this is why we say that the body will sacrifice fat loss to protect the blood sugar. If it has to choose between a burning fat or keeping the glucose stable for the brain, so it will definitely choose the stability first. That means the sugars first. So from the glucose, this glucose comes as a main source of energy, like the carbohydrates, what we eat, foods like rice, roti, bread. uh, sweets are broken down during digestion into glucose. So after we eat, this glucose enters the bloodstream, which naturally causes a blood sugar rise. Okay. Whenever the blood sugar rises, so the body must respond, and this is where the hormone like insulin comes into action. uh, Again, but here the body is I mean, this is important point that people usually take it as like the body is capable of making its own glucose. They don't know. Okay, that is why this term like gluconeogenesis. So even if you are not eating like carbohydrate rich meal, the body can produce its energy by itself. Okay, so that means that the liver can convert the proteins and certain fats into glucose as and when needed. So the glucose, by this also I mean that again the glucose is essential for survival. The body has a backup production system built in. Okay, so it's not like ki, if you are not enough fed state, so again, there will be a hypo or hyper, but again, the mechanism is obviously the body is in a protective mechanism that time. So, insulin, we all know that whenever we eat carbs, so it gives a kick to insulin to manage the glucose which is present in the blood. But on the other way, the insulin is also the storage hormone as well. So, insulin is a hormone released when the blood sugar rises, mainly after we eat, and it is produced by the organ pancreas that we all know, right? But now think of the insulin as a storage and a transport hormone. ठीक है, so job क्या है इसका? Basically to move the glucose out of the blood and into the cell, so where it can be used and stored. ठीक है, so here what insulin actually does to the body is it sends the glucose into the muscles, so when where it can be produce energy and it can store in the liver again as a backup reserve, as called as glycogen. Okay, but then if there is more glucose than needed, okay, so it converts into excess fat for storage, and at the same time it temporarily stops the fat burning because the body uh, chooses to use or store the incoming fuel first. Okay, so it's like that if a person is eating too frequently, so the insulin and the blood glucose, they both are rising simultaneously in the blood and causing a inflammation for the body. तो आगे अभी आने वाली slides में we will just going to understand this concept only. ठीक है, so that's why insulin itself is not harmful. It is a natural and very necessary hormone for the survival. But the problem arises when the insulin stays elevated throughout the day. ठीक है, so which usually happens with again frequent eating हो गया, excess of refined carbohydrates or lack of recovery timing हो गया. ठीक है, so that's why insulin is not bad, but chronic elevation is the main issue, right? Okay, so when a healthy glucose uh, I mean, the level should be there, should be maintained so that the body can work, in a normal function. Okay. So again, after we eat a balanced meal, the glucose rises slightly. Okay, in the blood, but this is normal and expected. Okay, in response, the pancreas will release a small and brief amount of insulin. Okay, insulin then help the glucose enter the cell and especially the muscle and the liver where it is used for the energy or stored. ठीक है, but as the glucose moves into the cell, the blood sugar should return to normal. Okay, so once the job is done, the insulin level will come back to its normal. So the key is the rise, respond, return to normal. This should be the normal scenario in the body. Okay, so the smooth temporary cycle should be like that only and should not constantly high. ठीक है, बट प्रॉब्लम वहां पे आती है जिसको हम बोलते हैं इंसुलिन रेजिस्टेंस. ठीक है, सो अ काइंड ऑफ जहां पे इवन अगर आप देखो तो द राइज द रिस्पॉन्ड एंड रिटर्न टू बेस लाइन इज व्हाट वी कॉल इज इंसुलिन सेंसिटिविटी. ठीक है, सो व्हेन द सेंसिटिविटी इज गुड, द सेल्स रिस्पॉन्ड इजीली. ठीक है, एनर्जी फील स्टेबल थ्रू आउट द डे, क्रेविंग्स आर लेस, फैट लॉस बिकम्स easier. ठीक है, बिकॉज द इंसुलिन इज नॉट कॉन्स्टेंटली एलिवेटेड. ठीक है, सो द गोल is not to zero the insulin. The goal is always towards the efficient use of the insulin and a temporary insulin response. Same in the case like as we looked in the last PPTs where the inflammation was coming. So if the inflammation is for a shorter period, it's okay. If the inflammation is for a longer period, it becomes critical to the body. Same ways, if the insulin is rise for a certain period of time and it goes off from the blood, the functioning is normal. If the insulin stays high all the time, that is the problem where the body will not be able to go into a rest mode. ठीक है, so वहां पे basically again the body is on a fight and flight mode only and the body will not be able to recover properly with one uh, management cycle, right? Okay, so what goes wrong with a modern pattern? Okay, so because of the modern lifestyle, the problem usually is not one big meal, it is constant stimulation throughout the day. Okay, which is like a frequent eating without gaps, eating too many refined carbohydrates like bakery products, processed snacks, and all, having sugary drinks and liquid calories, constant snacking even when you are not true hungry. So that means ki okay, ठीक है, this is a lunch time, ठीक है, everybody is eating, I should also eat without knowing or unknowing ki am I hungry or no. So again, there is no clearance time which is given to the body. So every time we eat, the insulin is released. So if we keep eating every 2 or 3 hours, insulin is not going to settle down ever. ठीक है, so this actually results in elevated insulin all the day and the body loses its recovery window. ठीक है, so there is no time for burning, repair or metabolic reset. ठीक है, over a period of time with this constant high insulin environment pushes the body towards fatigue, craving, weight gain and eventually insulin resistance. So, what is insulin resistant? The core concept is that insulin resistance means the cells stop responding properly to insulin. Insulin is present, but sometimes even in high amounts. Okay? But the cells are no longer opening their doors easily. So insulin and cortisol, इसको आप एक शटल की तरह ले सकते हो. It is like a gate pass. If the cell को energy ट्रांसफर करने के लिए you need a insulin receptor. ठीक है, but by the time if the insulin receptor is like damaged or it's not functioning properly, so the person comes into a category of insulin resistance. So that's why in a diabetic patient, usually we check with HbA1c and with other parameters, we check the fasting insulin level also. ठीक है, so what happens? ठीक है, so glucose stays in the bloodstream instead of entering the cells. Seeing this high sugar or high blood sugar, the pancreas try to compensate releasing even more insulin. So both the glucose and the insulin remain elevated in the blood. So again, there is one marker which is like C-peptide, which we also get checked in case of the person is having diabetes, just to know how much stressful the pancreas are working with this insulin management thing. So why it happens? So not because the body is broken, but because the body is overstimulated. ठीक है. सो एक चीज जब बार बार एक चीज के साथ कॉम्पनसेट करे जा रही है तो कहीं ना कहीं जाके वो इनिशियली दैट विल गोइंग टू डैमेज. So a common reason includes like constant glucose exposure from frequently eating refined carbohydrates, then which will lead to continuous insulin signaling with no gap between the meals, and which will lead to cellular overload where the cells are already full of fuel. ठीक है. अब कोई जगह ही नहीं है तो वो कहाँ जाएगा. ठीक है. सो उससे होता क्या है, तो बॉडी गोज इनटू अ प्रोटेक्टिव शटडाउन. अब एक चीज को अगर बहुत ज्यादा सरप्लस में है तो एक लेवल के बाद तो इवन इफ यू कैन सी द डैम का एक एग्जांपल लेके चले तो उसमें भी वाटर फ्लो का देयर विल बी अ लेवल, बट व्हेन इट क्रॉसेस द लेवल दे क्लोज द गेट्स, rather they open the gates to just overflow, जो भी पानी है वो निकल जाए उसमें से. बट यहाँ पे भी the same scenario is there that the body goes into a shutdown or a protective mode. ठीक है. So then now we can reframe this idea like the insulin resistance is a cellular defense and not a true failure, because the body is trying to protect himself from the constant excess, and it is not a malfunctioning scenario. ठीक है. सो ओके. सो पैनक्रियास से इंसुलिन आया, उसने ग्लूकोज को एब्जॉर्ब किया, इन दिस वी ऑल अंडरस्टूड. नाउ व्हाट इज इंसुलिन एंड फैट स्टोरेज. ठीक है. हाउ दे आर कनेक्टेड. As I said that insulin promotes the fat storage, rather it is also a storage hormone. ठीक है. So वहां पे whenever the insulin is elevated, the body receives a message to store the fuel rather than burn it. ठीक है. अभी ज्यादा है तो वो कहीं तो करेगा ना, तो उसको स्टोर करेगा. सो व्हेन द इंसुलिन इज हाई द फैट बर्निंग इज ब्लॉक्ड. So it doesn't matter how motivated someone is. This is a hormonal environment which determines whether the fat loss occurs efficiently or no. ठीक है. सो अब अभी क्या है इसमें, जो सबसे मेन चीज है वो ये है कि जो एब्डोमिनल फैट सेल्स हैं दे हैव मोर इंसुलिन एंड कॉर्टिसोल रिसेप्टर्स एज कंपेयर टू द अदर एरियाज ऑफ द बॉडी. सो दिस मेक्स the belly region especially sensitive to both like high insulin and high stress hormones. ठीक है. आपने देखा होगा एक जिसको हम फैटी लिवर भी बोलते हैं कि प्रोटूडेंट एक बेली के अराउंड ही पीपल टेंड टू गेन अ लॉट ऑफ वेट विच इज कॉल्ड लाइक अ विसरल फैट ऑल्सो. सो ड्यूरिंग द पीरियड ऑफ क्रॉनिक स्ट्रेस पुअर स्लीप हो जाएगा या कांस्टेंट इंसुलिन स्पाइक्स होगा बिकॉज ऑफ ईटिंग अगेन एंड अगेन एंड ऑल दोज थिंग्स. सो द एरिया टेंड्स टू एक्सपैंड मोर क्विकली देन द अदर्स. ठीक है. सो द बेली फैट एक्चुअली इज a hormonal signal. ठीक है. It's not about that somebody is not disciplined or somebody is lazy. It is a hormonal signal and it often reflects the stress load, the insulin load, and the metabolic imbalance rather than a willpower thing. ठीक है. Okay, so blood sugar spikes and crashes because this is what most of the people experience on daily basis without even realizing. जैसे a spike can happen uh, after consuming foods that raises the blood sugar quickly, such as your sugary foods or refined carbohydrates or liquid these things. So this causes a rapid rise in the blood sugar, and the body responds with a large release of insulin to down regulate this. ठीक है. But when the insulin rises too much, ठीक है. So it can pull glucose down quickly, leading to a crash. So this is the reason, one of the basic reason why we say to avoid especially all these things to a diabetic patient, because you never know when that crash will going to occur. ठीक है. So this sudden blood drop in your blood sugar creates a sudden hunger or a craving, especially for the sweets. ठीक है. Fatigue, sleeplessness, irritability, mood swings, brain fog, low focus, ये सब चीजें will going to come with all these sugar crashes. So when people interpret it as a willpower problem, it is basically a biological response. So the body is simply trying to restore the stable energy back. Okay, so that's why these cravings are biological alarms, and they are signals of unstable sugars and not just the discipline. Okay, so how do this disease pathway starts? So this is something which starts like 5 or 6 or 7 years pehle, and we call it usually as a window period for the disease. So can you can call as a disease progression pathway also, because the metabolic issues usually develop slowly and not overnight. So, and now just look at this picture and just follow the steps with me. Like, if it often begins with a insulin resistance where the cells stop responding efficiently. So to compensate this, the body produces high and high insulin. This high insulin environment promotes the fat gain, especially around the abdomen. ठीक है. So as the fat tissues increases, the inflammation rises, and over time this combination of high insulin and inflammation pushes the person towards pre-diabetes and eventually diabetes. ठीक है. So this is how this vicious cycle starts. ठीक है. And an important insight here is that insulin rises years before the glucose does. ठीक है. But if you look at your lab parameters, hardly any doctors or specialists, they do a fasting insulin or a postprandial insulin test. So this is something which is uncatchable. Okay, but if you are having symptoms, you should check your fasting insulin levels again. So blood sugar may still appear normal in earlier ages. जैसे आपने कोई टेस्ट कराया या कोई something like this preventive health checkups. So usually these things are missed. And फिर people say कि we तो test like every 6 months. ऐसा तो नहीं हुआ था. Suddenly this has started, but it is already there in the body. And once that threshold is like finished, then only the symptom starts appearing. Okay, so this is how we call it as a early metabolic disease. Is often insulin driven and not the glucose driven. But the poor this thing is we always check the glucose. Okay, so by the time glucose becomes abnormal, the imbalance has already been present for a longer time. Okay. So an important point to understand here is that the food is not only driver of the insulin. Okay. Stress alone can raise your blood sugar levels. Okay. So when we are stressed, the body releases again a stress hormone. Okay. So these hormones basically signals the liver to release the glucose into the bloodstream for the survival. Okay, response as even if we haven't eaten anything. Okay, this is a stress response which usually happens. So once the blood sugar rises, the insulin rises to manage it. And so insulin can increase without the food intake also. Okay, so now to add inflammation to this picture. So the chronic inflammation from the poor sleep or from the gut issues or from the infection or from the lifestyle stress, this makes the cell less responsive to insulin. which worsens the insulin resistance over time. ठीक है, so you can become a insulin resistant without overeating also. And it is not only about calories, it is about stress load, inflammation, and hormonal signaling, which is basically driving the body into again insulin resistance. So many people believe that simply cutting the calories, जितना मर्जी उसको कट कर लो, harder and harder will automatically lead to fat loss, but metabolically it is the opposite. So जब आप बहुत ज्यादा कैलोरीज रिड्यूस कर देते हो, लाइक एक्सट्रीम और प्रोलॉन्ग्ड फास्टिंग कैन गिव द बॉडी राइज टू स्ट्रेस. ठीक है, सो अगेन स्ट्रेस को बॉडी विल परसीव एज अ थ्रेट, and उसके अंदर it will start raising the cholesterol, which is a survival hormone. So that's how this whole vicious cycle uh, goes on like that only. So higher cortisol signals the liver to release more glucose, to keep the brain supply with a steady supply. And once the glucose rises, the insulin rises to control it. So when insulin is elevated, the fat burning is blocked. ठीक है, causing the fat loss to stay at halt, no matter how restricted your diet was, no matter how many efforts you are putting. So the issue here is not just the calories, it is the hormonal response to stress and restrictions. ठीक है, basic thing is that you cannot starve insulin resistance away. If insulin and stress hormones remain high, the body will resist fat loss no matter how low the calories can go. Okay. So now just let's understand the functional priorities at this level. So the extreme goal here is not the perfection or the extreme dieting. The goal is the signal correction basically. So for that, what we need to do? uh, किस चीज पे ज्यादा फोकस करना पड़ेगा, rather than focusing on calories only, reducing the glucose spikes by choosing a balanced and better food quality. That is very very important. It's the first point. Second thing is lowering insulin load by creating a meal gap and avoiding the constant snacking. ठीक है, third is the improving insulin sensitivity through better sleep, through movement, through stress management, and adequate protein and fiber. So these all things will help in improving the overall insulin sensitivity. We even say like walking after your meals will also increase the insulin sensitivity. Maybe 5-10 minutes walk, that is more than enough. And what we are not focusing on, so extreme restrictions, taking a diet totally banned in carbs, or going on a just 800 kilocalories diet will increase the stress hormones only. ठीक है, person will might do it just for a shorter period of time, but then again that frustration will be always there. Second thing is fear of carbohydrates. So carbohydrates themselves are not enemies. The problem is excess, poor quality, and poor timing. Okay, so if you have had your meal, like full meal, and after 1 hour suddenly on a dining table something was there and you just start doing it. So body was already in a halfway thing of a digestion process, and suddenly that fresh meal will add to the load. So these are the things which should be totally avoided. So ideally it should be like 3 to 4 hours gap in every meal. So level 1 is about the stability, balance, and not eliminating. ठीक है, blood glucose and insulin signals become steady. The body जब ये होगा, ठीक है, so the body naturally starts responding better. Okay. So the most important thing here is to remember is the mindset shift. So the insulin resistance is not a moral failure. It is not about laziness or it is not about the willpower. It is the body's protecting itself from the overload. So basically, it is the body's response to constant overloading, too many signals, too frequent, and for too long. Okay, so the body is not trying to harm, it is trying to defend itself from excess glucose, from excess insulin, and from excess stress. So the body, and this is completely reversible when we gradually normalize the signal. So, better meal timings, better balanced nutrition, improved sleep, reducing the stress and movement. So these all things will going to help the cells to come out of that overload, and then the cells begin to listen again. So when the environment improves, the body has ability to recover and rebalance on its own. Okay? So this was all for today's class. Next class again will be meeting at the same time. So now if you have any questions, so uh, I'll just stop share here. And anything you want to ask, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so Shivani, you were mentioning about a couple of tests that one should get done to understand the basic levels where the functioning is going wrong, like fasting
Hmm.
insulin you mentioned, and you mentioned
Yes,
C-peptide levels.
C-peptide levels. Right.
What else would you suggest for a person to get tested so that their status can be understood and known?
See, if you want to rule out that body, that glucose spikes are there, then obviously CGM is something which is really helpful. Apart from that, usually people they've tested everything like HbA1c, normal CBC, ESR, and everything, but these are the things which they never tested. Along with this,
Yes. Uh, hmm.
if you check the thyroid hormone also, so that is a plus plus to know that, because ultimately this is all metabolic issues which will arise together. ठीक है, and कहीं ना कहीं your sleep, your stress, your diet, everything matters in it. So it becomes